Hi, and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. A Shaun of the Dead tutorial. Something of a breakdown as to how I rendered the Shaun of the Dead piece that I posted about a week ago on this channel. We're going to be breaking this down into a couple different videos just because of the sheer length of all the footage that I have for this. So in this particular video, we're going to be kind of focusing on what might be considered part one, which is really just trying to get your drawing together and getting to your final line work. We're going to start with the caricature. And I have to admit here, when we go into this, what I'm going to be doing is speaking really to my style and how I go about rendering the final product. I've collected some technique from a bunch of different artists that work in digital, especially in Procreate, over several months or so, and watching YouTube videos and experimentation on my own and things like that. So again, I can speak to a method that some people use, others don't, but more importantly that I use. And if you're kind of curious as to how it's done, I'm really going to break it down into a step-by-step process that really kind of reveals all the little secrets and tricks and stuff like that. And maybe that's really kind of the best way to explain this. What I'm really kind of up to here is figuring out how to pull off a series of tricks to accomplish this optical illusion of a resemblance, of some sense of three-dimensionality, and an overall composition that kind of works and is pleasing to the eye. I've heard other artists refer to it as problem solving, and I can't say I disagree with that. I kind of think of it the same way. When I start a drawing, I usually have a pretty clear picture in my head of what I want the final product to look like when it's all said and done. But getting there is a series of obstacles usually, a series of roadblocks of saying, okay, well, I got this far and now I ran into this issue that I can't quite deal with, like a line that doesn't make sense, or how to overlap one thing over another, or how to get a color a certain way. And so it becomes a problem, if you will, that needs to be solved. And the problem-solving aspect of any sort of piece of artwork is something that can repeat over and over and over and over again. You'll solve one problem, just be faced with another, and then trying to figure out a unique way to kind of handle that before you can move into the next stage of your drawing is really kind of where the challenge comes in. And stages is another way to think of it as well. When I'm putting all this together, what I'm really trying to do here is come up with a step-by-step on how to do this. So for example, I'm not going to start with my fine line work because I have yet to render a rough sketch to kind of figure out where I want everything to go and how to compose on the page. And coloring obviously comes last, but stages of coloring as well, starting with those flats and coming in with shadows and light later. And again, the intent is to break all this down step by step. So let's start at the beginning and focus on the drawing itself. Now, I know I've gotten a good piece in this drawing already, but I think what you're going to find here is that what you're looking at is going to be thrown away pretty quickly. And it's because of the experimentation method I kind of go through when I'm working on these, I don't know, we might loosely call them caricatures, but I think at some point along the way I've developed my own style into doing these works, and I think I kind of meet this rough halfway point between caricature and portrait. A lot of the inspiration for a lot of the stuff I'm doing lately has come from a real love of caricature work, but also because I've been watching a lot of portrait studies lately, fine art portrait studies rendered in oil paints and things like that. So again, I'm kind of meeting the middle ground here somewhere where I want something to be semi-photorealistic, but a little bit of exaggeration to pull out something of a comedic caricature. And so how do we approach that? Well, okay, we're working on Shaun right now from our Shaun of the Dead piece, and the first step, at least for me, is to take a look at Shaun and try to figure out what in his face makes him unique. And in that, we can start deciding what areas of his face that we want to kind of focus on rendering very accurately, and what other parts that we want to kind of exaggerate. And so you saw that I tried kind of some sort of a version of Shaun that I worked with for a little while, but ultimately wasn't happy with it, scrapped it, and started working on the version or the drawing that you see right now. I love digital art and Procreate specifically because I find it very easy to work in, but above and beyond anything else, it's the layering that really kind of helps out my artwork. I work with a lot of layers, and it's not that I'm stacking everything on top of each other and getting something that's like 50 layers deep before you get your final product. It's really getting into this line drawing. I'm not going to move into colors, and I'm not going to move into the final stages until I'm very happy with the line drawing. And that line drawing might mean going back and doing rough, slightly less rough, and slightly less rougher over a series of maybe 5, 6, maybe even 10 layers until I finally get a line drawing that I'm happy with and I'm ready to move into the next stages with. So I might be, maybe 12 layers, maybe 15 layers deep at this point, just trying to get a sketch that I'm happy with. And I know it might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but this is maybe kind of the way that I see it. I can have some ability to render some sort of a rough drawing and get some rough composition in there. But as I start building on layers and redefining the drawing, what I'm really kind of doing is kind of putting down all the lines and then kind of only holding on or keeping the ones that really work for the piece that I'm trying to do. Now, when I'm drawing faces, couple things I'm trying to keep in mind, and you know, if I'm being honest here, you know, there is a certain element to the caricature development into how I put this together as well. So a while ago, when I got into kind of studying caricature, I came up with this search that I thought was really interesting for a book that I ended up buying and used as kind of the informative method as to how I do a lot of my caricature work. It was a book by Tom Richmond. He was a guy that used to work for Mad Magazine, and I believe it's called something like The Mad Art of Caricature Drawing. If you haven't seen it and it's something that you're interested in, this book really is kind of the holy grail for all things caricature-wise, at least in modern day as far as I'm concerned. If it's something that interests you, this book is well worth the buy, and it's really kind of gives you a lot of great techniques and a lot of exercises to help hone and develop your method, and your style as well. Now, having said that, what I really kind of gleaned out of the book more than anything else is how to kind of start the development stages of a caricature, and it really comes in two parts. Part one is the shape of the head itself, and that's really where I focus a lot of my caricature work, is trying to nail down that shape of the head. The second part is what is loosely referred to as the T-zone, and the T-zone is a reference to the nose and the eyes, that kind of the shape of the T that they make between the two of them. A lot of resemblance is found in that little T-zone. And you'll find that different caricature artists kind of go at this from different directions. Some start with the shape of the head and then work on the T-zone once they get that down, and others work opposite. They'll start in the T-zone, the eyes and the nose, and then just kind of draw the shape of the head later when they get to it later on. I think this really kind of informs how caricatures end up looking too, because if you end up starting with all the facial features inside the head and then draw the shape around it later, you're kind of forced to exaggerate that shape of the face more than you ordinarily would if you just started with that face shape first and then kind of drew everything inside of it. I can only speak to my method here. My method is to kind of start with shape of the head, and really it's because where I see resemblance more than anything else. What you will see with just about any drawing that I do is that I'll spend a lot of time struggling with nailing down the specific shape of the face, more specifically the jawline and sometimes the chin. Shaun is a great example of this. If you're looking at Shaun right now, I've got a rough sketch down, but it's not done. And the reason why is because the jawline doesn't match up on either side. I haven't quite decided how I want that kind of bend from the chin to the jaw to work. And so I'm trying out different areas on both sides of the face to see which one I like more. And later, when I go and put in my final kind of inks, so to speak, I'll just make a decision and kind of make it a little bit more symmetrical. Now, speaking specifically to the two characters here, we got Shaun and we have Ed on the left-hand side. And each of them have, again, their own unique facial features that I really try to kind of hone in on and make sure that I was kind of using it to build up the resemblance. So if we take Shaun, for example, Shaun has a very thin goatee that isn't going to be really kind of clear right now, but it'll come out a little bit more when we paint it blonde and get in the colors. In addition to that, he has a very pointy nose that kind of points up, and in addition, a very kind of unique mouth and hairline. I also, just kind of as a sidebar, like drawing ears. I think ears are fascinating. They're very unique on almost every individual person. Very, very similar to fingerprints in a lot of respects. And so I will take some time and draw some ears and have a lot of fun with that. But again, ultimately, you may notice that there's some discrepancies between one ear and the other ear on Shaun's head. So I will go back and clean that up a little bit later when I do that next layer of line work. Nick Frost, or Ed, on the left-hand side, also has some unique facial features as well. In particular, take a look at the bridge of his nose where it meets up between his eyebrows. There's a very distinct line right there. His eyes are very close set, so I really try to push them together a little bit more than normal. He has a wide set nose with some very flared up nostrils, and his mouth. Maybe this is the actor, maybe this is the character he's playing, I'm not sure, but Nick Frost, when he plays this Ed character, typically kind of skulks around the movie with this kind of open mouth breather type expression. And I really wanted to capture that in this caricature, even though it makes Nick Frost look, I don't know, a little silly, but, you know, ultimately isn't that kind of the point of a caricature, so I decided to go ahead and go with it. Now, we moved past this a little bit already, so let me just make a note on the teeth and the mouths really quick. Again, a lot of resemblance can be found on a person with a mouth, but mouths are very, very difficult to draw, at least accurately and naturally, because, as human beings interacting with each other, we tend to talk, so the mouth's always moving, and capturing it in a still form sometimes can, lose the expression you're going for, especially if you're looking for like an action pose or something that's, got some interest to it. So having the mouth open for Nick and also Simon Pegg was a good idea, I think, but mostly because Simon was talking, so it made sense to have his mouth open, and Nick, again, usually has that slack-jawed kind of expression. Now, the teeth are very interesting. I did draw in individual teeth in this one, although usually you won't see that in caricature, especially with females. When you draw each individual line, the teeth can start looking very big and unnatural, and again, there's exceptions to the rule, and people that break this rule very, very successfully. But generally speaking, when you're drawing in teeth, you usually kind of just draw it as in this blocked shape, without the individual lines separating each individual tooth. It kind of worked for what I was doing here, so again, I broke the rule, and I kind of feel like I broke it successfully, but generally speaking, you may want to keep that in mind. Another thing about Nick is his ears. I know I mentioned ears before, but if you take a look at those ears, they are humongous, and a lot of light shines through them, so they're very, very red, at least in the some of the photo references that I used for this picture, so I really kind of played up that red when I put in the color a little bit later on. Now, I'm somewhat happy with the rough sketches that I have in here, but I haven't moved to final inks yet. However, at some point or another, I know I'm going to have to deal with the background. And I knew that I wanted this to be like a really kind of thorough piece. And so for this particular one, I decided I didn't really want to get lazy in the background. I wanted to kind of truly fully render something and get it, looking as good as I possibly could. Now, I mentioned reference before. Let me just take a moment here and speak to that. If you're really going to kind of be working in this kind of thing where you're doing portraits or caricatures or something that bears resemblance of a real person or an actor, reference is really going to kind of be necessary. Trying to draw this sort of stuff out of your head is just begging for something to kind of go wrong, especially when you're working on a piece where you're staring at it for several hours. Again, I can't speak to other artists in this respect. I can only speak for myself, but when I'm drawing somebody and I'm trying to capture that resemblance, but I'm staring at it for hours on end, I start to really kind of second guess things. I start to feel like I've lost the resemblance and I have to walk away from it for a little while and come back to it later just to make sure that I'm catching that resemblance. And so this is kind of a good tip I might be able to offer for anybody that's really trying to get into caricature work. Speed. I know that kind of betrays a lot of the methodology for trying to get good technique down and stuff like that, but speed is really kind of the key, at least I think, to getting at the very least a really good kind of beginning caricature going. Now, here's what I mean by this. I'll probably do some more videos on the caricature method a little bit later on and get into a little bit more depth on it, but ultimately what I'm trying to kind of get at here is that when you look at somebody and you're trying to gather a resemblance, your brain does that pretty instantaneously, fractions of a second. And what's happening is you have to kind of learn how to kind of peek into your brain and see what it is that it's recognizing, the things that stand out more than anything else. Sometimes it's a very big, bold pair of glasses or a specific way that a smile is crooked or something like that. But it's something that made an impression in your brain and it kind of stuck there. And that, more than anything else, is the thing that you need to kind of pull out of your drawing. And sometimes the best way to do that is just to do it quickly and not think about it. The more you think about it, the more you focus on the detail, like trying to get the eyes a certain way and trying to get the nose a certain way and getting that particular strand of hair to fall in the face just the right way. And when you focus on the detail too soon, well, then you kind of lose the caricature a little bit. It's easy to lose the resemblance that you're kind of striving for. So again, trying to make big bold strokes with your pencil and do it quickly, 5 minutes or less, and again focusing on just makes those big basic parts of the face that stand out more than anything else. Now this is good advice, but is this something you're going to kind of do first time great right out of the gate? No. It's going to take practice, and more than anything else, the way that I learned was not only by practicing, but by taking photographs of people that had been caricatured by another artist, and before I looked at the artist's caricature, I drew my own. And when I was done, I compared it to the other artist's caricature and kind of saw where I might be able to kind of improve on some exaggeration or some places where I might have gone wrong. Now, I've used this word exaggeration a few times now, so let me kind of get into that just a moment here too before we move on. When I say exaggeration, understand that when it comes to caricature, that is the goal, to exaggerate something, but something, not anything. If you're just going to exaggerate anything, you can kind of go down the wrong path really quick. It's very easy just to think that caricatures are just a matter of taking a look at somebody and just giving them a big nose and calling it a day. But there's kind of a trickier little aspect to this. if that person doesn't have a nose that's bigger than the norm and you just make it bigger because you just want to exaggerate something, again, you're going to lose the resemblance, but more importantly, it's just going to be a poor caricature and you just won't read right on the page. So picking and choosing which parts that you shrink or grow or exaggerate or etc. is very, very important. And it's selective exaggeration, if that makes sense and if that helps. And that's why you'll see me go through various rough sketches, because really what I'm looking for is trying to kind of strive to get that balance of some things that I want to be bigger, some things I want to be smaller, and kind of making sure that it all works on the page and still kind of captures the character that I'm looking for. Now again, I mentioned balance, so I'll kind of point that one out as well. Bear in mind here that anytime you're working on anything that's an exaggeration, something's got to give. Now, what I mean by that is that if you're making something bigger, then something else has to be smaller in order to kind of balance it out. For example, if I make the eyes really big, then there's a chance that I might have to shrink down the nose just to make it balance on the page. If I make the top half of the head really, really large, then the bottom half of the head can't be large also. It kind of has to shrink down and be smaller to kind of, again, create that balance that you're looking for. And believe it or not, if you don't do this, again, you'll see it in your eye, in your final piece, that it just really just doesn't work on the page and kind of look, unattractive to the eye. So that's really where you want to kind of start here. If you're trying to kind of figure out where it is that you want to go to begin your caricatures, start with the balance method. Figure out which things are going to kind of get bigger, which things are going to get smaller, which things are going to grow farther apart, and which things are going to get closer together. For example, if your nose is further down the further down the face because you're kind of extending that bridge of the nose, well then you might have to shrink up that mouth and make it smaller, or at least very certainly that space between the nose and the top of the mouth. Now, I'm doing something of a full body thing here, and I'm not going to really kind of speak much to the anatomy other than just to say, knowing your anatomy is, pretty important. I kind of grew up as a teenager drawing comic book characters all the time, so I'm used to kind of drawing big, burly, muscular men in tights and stuff like that. I kind of gotten away from it over the years, but that's kind of how I learned anatomy, was through comic books. It's a really great place to kind of learn, your musculature and how to build skeletons and stuff like that. And as a result, to this day, I don't really spend a lot of time working on, loose, skeletons and building a musculature, especially with something like this where it's kind of loose and comical. Drawing in just a rough outline of a shirt and tie is something I've done a million times over, so I don't really have a lot of need to kind of lay out the rough sketch on it. I can kind of go to final lines on that pretty quickly. So my intent here is to really kind of focus and hone in on the face. And what you're probably noticing right now is I've finally gotten to the point where I'm starting my, what I might refer to as my final inks. Now, because I have that kind of love of comic book background, inking is an essential part of what I do. I'm going to try to hide these lines a little bit later on, but I don't feel comfortable working with something unless I have some nice, good black inks to kind of start off the final phase of my rendering. Again, just my method here. The other thing that I kind of want to point out, just related to Shaun here, is one of the things that makes his face very unique and very recognizable, I think, is the very, very sharp angles in his cheekbones. And so I wouldn't really do this usually with most other people, but with Shaun, I really kind of drew in those sharp angles and black lines because I want to make sure that I have a really good chance of being able to render it successfully later when I start adding in color, shadow, and light. I need to make sure those areas are kind of spelled out for me, or kind of blocked out, so that way I know exactly where I want to put light versus dark. And, again, a little bit later, I'll try to hide lines, erase them, recolor them, and stuff like that. But for right now, this is just kind of my safety net to make sure I kind of get everything to where I want to get it. Now, next thing we're doing here is we're working on Shaun's hands, holding the cricket bat here. And, hands are another thing that, some people struggle with, some people love drawing them. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with hands. Sometimes I know exactly what I'm drawing and I can go in there and just put it in first try. Other times I struggle with it and I got these fingers that just don't make any sense sitting next to each other. So for me, it's really just kind of a matter of trial and error. And, I'll say it again, going back to reference. I had a picture of Shaun of the Dead, or at least some sort of a promo still from the movie of Shaun of the Dead, that had the two of them standing in front of something similar to the background that I've rendered, this kind of like broken down shed. The difference was that the weapons they were holding, the cricket bat and the shovel, they were kind of like pointing towards each other into the middle of the piece. So I switched that around a little bit, and took a couple of other liberties as well, but I mostly used one photograph for a lot of my reference here. And so the cricket bat was already there, and him holding it in his hands was was something I kind of loosely used, but because I changed the position, I had to kind of get a little bit creative with how those hands look because it wasn't an exact copy of the photograph I was looking at. Same thing with Nick and the spade and the shovel that he's holding. The photograph reference I was using didn't have any of his hands in the frame, so I pretty much had to do this out of imagination. For better or for worse, it is what it is. My hope here is that nobody's really all that focused on the hands. I don't spend all day trying to render them, and hopefully I just rendered them well enough that they're easily ignored, and you'll focus on what I want you focusing on, which is the faces. And that's kind of what the composition is meant to do as well. Hopefully the lines between the arms and the cricket bats and the weapons and stuff like that are drawing you in towards the center, maybe bringing you in so that we can kind of come up and kind of get a good look at those two faces. That's really kind of where we start finishing up our process here. So you'll notice that I've started inking Shaun. Not quite happy with the hand, so I'll put in another layer and try that again and try to get a better rendering of it a little bit later. But as I focus on Nick here, the main things that I'm focusing on is just trying to capture again not only the caricature of his body, but also, not only the caricature of his face, but of his body as well. Nick is a heavier guy, so I have to draw him heavier, and that means these big, huge, hulking shoulders that really kind of come up almost to his chin, to his jawline, almost, kind of hiding any semblance of a neck that he might have. And you can see there's a big difference with the way Shaun's rendered there, where he has a full neck, shoulders that kind of come out, because he's a much lighter, much skinnier individual. As I'm drawing the spade and the shovel here, one of the things I did struggle with is trying to get this blade to look somewhat three-dimensional. I think I kind of tried to get away from it in terms of the line drawing, but come back to it when I got into the coloring a little bit later on. As these inks are going in, let me also kind of point out here that as I'm working with these figures in the background, even though I'm going into the final ink stages and getting ready to move to color, I'm still very specific about keeping everything on its own layer. So, I go through a lot of layers. I'll be the first to admit it, but there's nothing wrong with that as long as I'm kind of keeping good layer management. Procreate doesn't allow you a ton of layers, especially if you're working at resolutions of like 300 dpi. So you have to be a little bit economical about how you use your layers, but this is kind of how I kind of approach it. I start off with all my roughs, and once I get to my final inks, then I can start deleting some of the layers because I don't need those roughs anymore. So even though I may take maybe 20 layers to get to my final line work, once I've achieved my final lines, I'll delete most of the rough layers because they're just not needed anymore, and I won't ever need them ever again. And then I can kind of start over with a fresh set of layers to get into the color rendering and stuff like that. But again, back to the point. I'm working on final inks here for Shaun. I'm going back in and I'm trying to kind of get everything cleaned up and then make sure that hand looks a little bit better than before. But since this is going to be my final line work here, notice that Shaun's going to sit on his own layer. And when I go to do color rendering a little bit later, Shaun will stay on his own layer. And the various elements of the color that I apply to him will be able to kind of apply just to his layers and nobody else's. Nick will be on his own layer, and that layer will be behind Shaun because he's going to be sitting slightly in the background. And then the same thing will happen for the background. The background is its own layer. So that way when I'm punching in stuff like the color and the shade and stuff like that, I can just paint freely without having any worries that I'm overspraying or overpainting into one of the characters in the foreground. The other point behind doing this too is because when you're doing something like you're keeping the background in its own layer and your characters and foreground in their own layers, you're going to have the ability to do some little tricks with filters and stuff like that to help build up some contrast. And I'll admit I'm kind of getting ahead of myself or getting into coloring if I'm talking about that, but that is something that's going to be coming up in the next video that I do when we start getting into the render phase of this drawing. But let me get back to the line work here. Just bear in mind here, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get my final lines in, but when it comes to those final lines, getting them smooth not jaggedy looking is really kind of the goal. Clean line drawing is something I'm very insistent upon, and again, I will not move on to next steps until I have my clean lines. Now, what do I mean by clean lines? Well, all right, here we go. When we talk about brushes here, I am using a tapered ink brush, but I want to kind of stress the idea here that I don't really believe in this concept that special brushes have some sort of a way of making our art better. You either have the ability to lay down the drawing, or you got to work on your technique a little bit. A brush isn't really going to save you here. But what I am doing is I'm trying to mimic the old style kind of comic book ink brushes. So they have tapered on both ends, they're pressure sensitive. And again, this is something that Procreate already provides for you. This isn't a special brush. The only thing I've done is taken an ink brush that Procreate provides as part of the software, and I've tweaked it just slightly because what I wanted to do is to get a little bit more smooth of a stroke to it. So I just kind of turned up the smoothness just a little bit, but that's all I've done. It's still basically the same Procreate brush that we start with. Now, when I'm drawing, and maybe this is something that people can benefit from if they're not familiar with it, I'm trying to do each of these lines in kind of like a single stroke type mentality. So I'm not kind of like doing a rough, a scribble as I lay down these lines. I'm trying to kind of come in big and bold and kind of move my entire arm as I'm laying down my line. So for instance, Shaun's arm there, that arm is kind of a jaggedy line there that has like a little bit of curve to it. But the thing is that it was laid down in one stroke. And if I, by laying it down in one stroke, what I'm able to do is adjust the pressure on the pen to the surface of the tablet. And in doing that, I can get this great variation of a thick to thin line. Now, this doesn't come without a certain amount of practice, but the idea here is that this variation in line thickness creates interest and depth on the page. Now, it's not random. There is point and purpose behind it. But generally speaking, if you get out and just go with the flow, that kind of one stroke method I'm talking about, a lot of the time you can get a really, really good line that has good interest in terms of variation, and you can kind of leave it alone without, maybe just a couple of little tweaks here to kind of erase little elements of it and stuff like that. The other thing to kind of state here is that when it comes to my line work, I also like to overdraw a lot. What I mean by that is that, I'm not worried about where my line stops. I will overdraw past the point where I'm supposed to stop and then go back in and erase to kind of clean up that edge a little bit later. If I try to stop prematurely, which I do sometimes, then I have to go back in later and kind of connect lines that weren't connected before. And if you kind of pay attention to some of the elements of Shaun and Nick, you'll see that I've kind of done that. I've had to go kind of clean up lines to kind of connect things together because I was a little bit lazy about it in the earlier stages of the line work. When it comes to your inks, one of the tried but true rules to anybody that's like an old school comic book artist is to understand that you have two main concepts you're kind of dealing with when it comes to your inks. It's economy of line and line weight. And I've already talked about line weight as that variation of thickness and thinness. So let me just kind of finish it up by mentioning the fact that when it comes to thick lines, the real secret to this is that you want to go thicker in the areas where you're supposed to have shadow. And you want to go with thinner lines in the areas that are exposed to the light. Now, I haven't followed that 100% here, but generally speaking, you're going to see that kind of held true to that method. The areas that are away from the light source, which are kind of like in the lower portion of the arms and the Adam's apple of the chin and the under portion of the top of the hair, those are very, very thick, bold lines. And the reason why is because they're away from the sun, and so I'm hinting at a bit of shadow. Other areas have very, very thin lines, like the top of the head, for instance, where you get into the hair, or the left edge of the cricket bat. It's disappeared for a second there, but if you look at it again a little bit later, the left edge of the cricket bat has a much thinner line than the right edge of the cricket bat. And it's because that edge faces the sun and the other edge does not. It's in shadow. And again, the idea here is that the thicker lines really are kind of evoking that concept of shadow for you, and it gives it weight on the page. It almost makes it seem like it has a certain three-dimensionality, even though there isn't really color to help that along as of yet. These thicker, bolder lines are going to help you decide where your shadows go a little bit later. So this is where I come back to this idea that you're not moving on to your rendering until you know that you've got rock-solid line work that doesn't need any more tweaks. I am the first to admit that I'll get lazy sometimes and cheat that methodology a little bit and kind of move forward before I should, because it is, exciting to get into colors. But if you're really trying to get a good piece to kind of get to a final end product, it's got to be with this line work. And the reason why is because without a good original sketch or a good original drawing, fixing it and painting might be possible depending on your skill, but a lot of times you'll kind of repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again because you're going to be very dependent on your source drawing that you're going to kind of use as your reference for color later on. I see this a lot in tattoos. Tattoo artists will tattoo and then put out their final product and say this looks great, and a lot of times it doesn't because the line drawing that they started with was crap. So if you're starting with a bad line drawing, how do you expect to make a permanent ink tattoo look any better, again, if you started with something that didn't look good to begin with? If you ever watch any of those tattoo shows, maybe you're kind of familiar with something similar to that. Now this is the end of the line work here, so this is what the end product looks like. We're going to be finishing up the video right here and continuing with part 2, where we'll start talking a little bit more about the rendering. So I hope I had some good advice for you here, kind of working with the next stages of the drawings and the caricatures. If you're curious about any of those next stages of rendering, stay tuned for the next video. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and share. Thank you.